Welcome to Unit 1 of Public Speaking and Persuasion. This unit will last through the first 2 weeks of the course and will end in an introduction speech. This PowerPoint will introduce you to communication and, specifically, public speaking. So let's get started. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. So the first question that we need to ask is this: why do we study public speaking? Why does Robert Morris University require that all students, regardless of their major, take public speaking and even comm skills classes at all? What do you think? Well, public speaking is actually a very valuable tool. Rothwell says in our Practically Speaking textbook that teaching, law, religion, politics, public relations, and marketing all require substantial public speaking knowledge and skill. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, as many other career paths also require not just public speaking, but speaking in general. We must be able to communicate adequately with our colleagues, superiors, and employees. Rothwell goes on to say that 70% of employed Americans found public speaking skills to be critical to their career success. 70%! That's a lot. Now, we aren't given the details about the other options that the people had to choose from, but I bet if the next option was that public speaking skills were just important to their success, most of the participants in the study would have agreed. Before you go to the next slide, jot down some reasons that you think public speaking is important, and we'll revisit this in our discussion board for this unit. Once you're done, click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Rothwell says that competent public speakers are able to present complex ideas clearly and fluently, keep the audience's attention, analyze important issues, conduct research, make reasonable arguments, and support claims with valid proof. Still, Jerry Seinfeld, during a stand-up comedy routine, asked his audience rhetorically, "Do you know what the number 2 fear among Americans is?" Death. Death is number 2. What's number 1? Public speaking. That means that you would rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy. So if public speaking is so important, but everyone is so terrified of it, how do we overcome our fears and become better public speakers? Click the next slide to find out. We know what competent public speakers can do, so let's talk about how we can reach those goals. First, we have to learn the rules. Many rules are contextual. Know what your audience expects and provide that for them. Rothwell quotes Getter and Nowinski, who say, "Communication becomes inappropriate if it violates the rules." Second, demonstrate the skills that you've learned. Communication skills include clear, fluent, and concise speaking to an audience. Rothwell says that having the knowledge without demonstrating the skill will not produce competent communication. Next, you must become receptive to audience feedback. When you recognize and adjust according to audience feedback, you are demonstrating receptive accuracy. Fourthly, you must commit to becoming better. Excellent public speakers were not born with such communication skills. They were practiced, honed, and practiced some more. As Rothwell says, attitude is as important as aptitude. I like to say, fake it till you make it. If you believe in yourself, your audience will believe in you too. Finally, become an ethical speaker. Be respectful, honest, fair, and responsible. This includes citing your sources when appropriate. Now that you have some basic knowledge, let's take a look at some important terms. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Communication is a transactional process, which means that the speaker is both a sender and a receiver, as is the audience. We'll revisit this in a minute. What's important to understand is that for communication to be effective, you must establish a relationship with your audience. This is as important as what you're saying. To this end, Rothwell says, effective public speaking blends excellent content with a strong audience connection. This is done through shared meaning. which means that both the speaker and the audience have a mutual understanding of the message. If there is any ambiguity on either end, communication is not effective. Communication and public speaking are related, but they are not the same thing. Click the arrow to find out what public speaking is. Public speaking is an act of communication. It is not the only form of communication, but it happens to be what we will focus on in this course. Public speaking occurs when an identified speaker presents a message to an audience with a specific purpose in mind. The model for this is called the rhetorical situation. Click the arrow to see what this model looks like in action. The rhetorical situation can be graphically represented like this. The arrows pointing in all directions represent the fact that public speaking is a transactional process. You can see that the speaker both sends and receives messages, as does the audience. We also have to have an occasion and a speech. For example, if I were to stand in an empty room and talk about nothing, I may be a speaker, but I don't have an audience, and my speech wouldn't really have much content. If even one part of the situation, the rhetorical situation that is broken, the whole thing falls apart. Keep this in mind when you're preparing your speeches. You must think about the audience and your occasion when you, the speaker, are preparing your speech. All right, here's a checkup on what you've learned so far. Can you identify the parts of the rhetorical situation? Take a minute and write them down. Can you explain the transactional process of communication? In other words, what makes communication transactional? Take a minute and answer these questions, then click the arrow to advance to the next slide. That does it for our communication competence lesson. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I can be reached by email or phone. You may call or text me.